So can we start with warm welcome for Rick, please? Can you all see the screen? Or can you manoeuvre yourself into a position where you can see it? Over to you, Rick.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for this chance to address the meeting. Just set my little clock. Okay, I've prepared about 40 slides to go through quickly. I've only got 10 minutes. I'm going to talk quite nervously quickly. Basically, 3 years ago in Fukushima, they had 3 meltdowns in 2 days. This is a shot of reactor number 3 exploding. There's a close-up. The blast went basically about 5 times as high as the building, and you can see huge chunks of the roof were blown up there. That's in reactor 3. I'll come back to it in a second, because there's a difference between the way the 3 reactors blew up. This next slide doesn't show up very well. Okay, on the left here, you can see that was reactor 1 blowing up. Basically, the blast went sideways. From reactor 3, the blast basically went vertically, and most scientists whose opinions I read say there was probably a conflagration in reactor 1, which is hydrogen exploding. Think of woof sound. And this is probably a quick, spontaneous nuclear fission. Basically there's probably been a small nuclear reaction inside reactor 3. I'll push on fairly quickly. There is when Fukushima popped off, the wind blew most of the poison out into the Pacific. The wind came from the northwest for a little while on day 2 when reactor 3 was leaking cesium all over the place. That's why you have the pink shape, and as you can see, it comes down to very close to Tokyo. Basically, all of that red area should be uninhabitable for humans. Humans shouldn't live there. That is the same degree of contamination that you find in Chernobyl, and where people are not allowed to live, where it is that contaminated. That is basically what is left from reactor 3 when it blew up. There is from on top of the site, you can see what's going on there. Basically, I haven't got my little pointer thing, doesn't matter. Sorry, basically you can see at the top right-hand corner, reactor 4, then number 3, complete smoking ruin, which was smoking. This is about 2 days after the accident. The one on the top right-hand corner is reactor 4, which hadn't blown up yet. What I want you to notice on this photo is the steam coming out of the reactor. I want to remind you, TEPCO for the first 3 months said the reactors are all in cold shutdown. We have not had a meltdown. And while they're saying it's in cold shutdown, it has obviously melted, had a meltdown. It's obviously broken its containment, broken out of its containment. That steam coming out is containing cesium, strontium, plutonium, all the rest of it, the whole 10 yards. They lied for 3 months saying that it was in cold shutdown when it wasn't. The other point I want to make is that they detected xenon-91 and other radioactive gases at the perimeter of the plant 2 hours before the tsunami struck. In other words, they had already started to have a meltdown from the earthquake because the cooling pipes running into the building were fractured when the whole building is shaken around. That's a really important point to remember. It's not the tsunami that did this, it's an earthquake that did this, and they have the Japanese have 50 nuclear reactors in their earthquake zones. 3 minutes gone already. This is reactor 4, as you can see. It's had it did not have fuel in its reactor at the time, it only had fuel in the spent fuel pool. Reactor 3 next to it did have fuel, had a meltdown. The meltdown produces hydrogen. The hydrogen is produced when the fuel rods are in, the fuel is in fuel rods made of zirconium. If the zirconium is exposed to steam at about 600 degrees centigrade, the zirconium strips the oxygen out of the water, forms zirconium oxide, releases hydrogen. In other words, when we had 2 hydrogen explosions in reactor 1 and reactor 3 on the second day, it was then completely obvious, to me, and I'm not a trained scientist, to anyone else who bothers to pay attention, completely obvious on the second day that they had had a full meltdown, yet for 3 months TEPCO officials were continuing to say, oh no, it is in cold shutdown. This is outrageous. Okay, pushing quickly along. Here's an example of the condition of the plant. There's 250 foot high exhaust stacks, and this is a close-up of one of the supports, the sort of framework around the outside of the exhaust stack. As you can see, it's been wiggled by the earthquake and has rusted through. The whole plant is in this sort of condition. Ripped, rusting, torn. Here is a picture of how it should look. As you can see, sort of an inverted light bulb with a donut around the bottom. Here is another one. I'm just showing you these quickly to give you an idea of how it should be. Basically, the little red sort of pill in the middle is the RPV, reactor pressure vessel. The yellow around the outside, the light bulb, and the blue around the bottom is the PCV, pressure containment vessel, which is meant to, if anything goes wrong in the red pill bit in the middle, the outside, the light bulb, is meant to be a containment and stop any radioisotopes getting out into the environment. What has happened is reactors 1, 2 and 3, they've had a meltdown. The RPV, reactor pressure vessel, the red pill in the middle, has broken within 6 to 8 hours in each case. The pressure containment vessel has broken in all 3 cases. Another one, this is how it should look when it's running well. You can see the reactor is the sort of red cube in the middle. And I've shown you this to show how dangerous it is. They bubble the water in from the bottom, it gets heated up to red hot by the little red cube, then it turns to steam. They take the steam out the top, run it into the steam generators. They have about 4 feet of water over the top of the rods. If something goes wrong, such as for example an earthquake, if you're in an earthquake zone or a tsunami, you lose that 4 feet of water over the rods. As soon as the top of the rods is exposed, the zirconium in them starts to melt down and catches fire. Now what's happened in Fukushima, here is one of the best guesses that I've come across. It's melted to the bottom of, that's the red pill in the other structure, it's melted to the bottom of that. The thing about these designs, you get the reactor in the middle of kind of this red pill, the control rods all come in from the bottom, which means when the reactor, the red cube part, starts to melt down, it goes down to the bottom and then immediately burns through. Where the control rods come through, they have not very strong gaskets around each control rod. General Electric built it this way because it's cheaper and easier than having the control rods coming in from the top, because they wanted to load the fuel in and out from the top. So they built a really strong metal container and then they drill holes in it so they can put the control rods in through the bottom. As soon as they have a problem, whatever melts down goes straight out for the holes around where the control rods come in, then melts down to the bottom of the PCV, pressure containment vessel, or the light bulb here. As you can see, slumps to the floor. Now there's a lot of debate about whether it has slumped to the floor there and then burnt through the last 3 feet of concrete and then the 6 inches or so, 8 inches I think, of steel around the bottom, or whether it's only burnt halfway through that. Personally, I think it hasn't burnt through the bottom of the pressure containment vessel, or we would be seeing far more poisonous water than the very deadly water we're seeing now. It's probably gone off to the side here and is lying around in that's the donut sliced through, lying around in it's called the suppression chamber. So, I've only got 3 minutes, I must hurry up. Here's another close-up I showed you. Okay, I'm going to jump on ahead a bit. Here you can see where the fuel has come down onto the concrete floor, and then where the tubes go down into the donut bit, there's actually metal exposed there, there's no concrete. It's almost certainly burned through the metal there, it gets into the little bit under there, which is a drain for condensation, and then that drains out to the bottom. So this water around the bottom here basically has the nuclear fuel, water running over the nuclear fuel, coming out there, and then filling the basement of the building there. I did a few close-ups here, which I haven't got time to go into very much. This I'm showing you to show, they set in a probe down the side here, and they managed to measure the radiation about once every foot or so. And as you can see, round about the level of the top of the water there, they're getting radiation of 8 sieverts an hour. Now 4 sieverts will kill you. If you get 4 sieverts of radiation, you'd be in hospital for 2 or 3 weeks, all your hair would fall out, your digestion doesn't work anymore, 2/3 of you would die, strong ones would survive. 6 sieverts would kill anyone for sure. The radiation around here is 8 sieverts in an hour. If someone's in there working for 3/4 of an hour, they're going to get 6 sieverts and they're dead for sure. Not maybe. Now here's a more horrifying one. This is from reactor 1. If you look at the numbers there, they put in a probe, you can't quite see it, they put in a probe on this side and they lowered it down. It's the 4 green dots, the 4 green squares there, and they took measurements in each of those places, and they get 39 sieverts, 54 sieverts, 57 sieverts, 72 sieverts. 72 sieverts. That is more than a sievert a minute. If you're there for 5 minutes, you're going to get 6 sieverts, you're going to be dead. Now that shows why these buildings are impossible to enter and clean up. And the Japanese said as soon as it happened, oh, we'll clean it up in 40 years' time. Within 40 years, here's our plan, it'll be cleaned in 40 years. To do that, they had to develop robots which can go in there and work in this radiation. All the electronics we have at the moment, when it goes into this radiated an environment, ceases to work within 10, 15 minutes. So they had to develop a new series of robots with hardened electronics which can stand up to this radiation, and they say, oh, no worries, we'll have that worked out in 15 or 20 years. Like, in my opinion, no way. No way. When I saw Fukushima pop off on TV, I thought, wow, learn this word. We're going to be talking about this word for hundreds of years.
I saw the lights on.
Okay, thank you. I'll be real quick. Now, just talking about the groundwater. The blue line there is roughly the level of the groundwater, and that's the plant. So what they were doing for a long time is try and pump the water out of the plant so it comes in from the groundwater and then doesn't go back out into the groundwater. They've run out of storage capacity to do that. That's why they were pumping out 400 or 500 tons a day. This shows what their problem is. The water, 1,000 tons a day, passes through the site. Some of it goes into the building, mixes with fuel, comes back out into the groundwater, and then goes into the Pacific Ocean, which is, 150 meters away. This is the geology of the area. Basically, as you can see, there's several permeable layers there in which they have already detected radiation. Actually, this picture goes down to 50 meters. I was reading the other day that a sample they did from 80 meters already contains strontium. So it's already down below the level of the sea in all the groundwater under the plant. This is spent fuel pool number 4. Okay, I'll just finish this point. Spent fuel pool number 4, as you can see, a lot of concrete has been blown into these basically metal boxes. Any concrete going down the side of the metal boxes between the box and its container could quite easily jam as they're trying to draw the spent fuel rods out, and it is quite likely one of them will snap or break. When these things snap or break, it is time to evacuate the plant. They will then lose control over the plant because they won't be there to adjust all the pipes and everything else and keep the water running. Therefore, you would probably get a fuel pool fire and you would have to evacuate a third of your country and abandon Tokyo. I'd love to talk for another 10 minutes, but that'll do me for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much indeed for that, Rick. Very interesting diagrams there.
Thank you. You were talking about nuclear fuel rods before. I just want to talk a little bit about the design of the plants in Fukushima. They are boiling water reactors. It's a design from General Electric in the 1950s, who won World War II, so they said to Japan, here, build these, do what you're told, basically, in my opinion. It's an old design that was for a nuclear submarine, therefore it's very compact, therefore they stored the fuel. When they refueled it, they had to store the fuel near to the reactor. General Electric took this design, made it 3 times bigger, gave it to the Japanese and said, build this. I didn't understand this until Fukushima popped off and I started looking into it. The spent fuel is lifted out the top of the reactor and then stored in a pool up on the 4th story of the reactors. Now these are concrete buildings in I think we will all admit we know already, an earthquake zone. Concrete buildings with an earthquake zone with a swimming pool on the 4th floor full of totally lethal stuff, which, if it is not kept underwater for the first 5 years, immediately starts to burn and poisons everything within 1,000 kilometres. Japan has about 30 of these. The United States has about 30 or 40 of the same design. They're now 40 years old, plants that are 40 years old. That is why the Americans are not talking about what is going wrong at Fukushima. The Japanese are not admitting how bad Fukushima is. I think it would probably cost around $500 billion, $500 billion to clean up properly, even though it's impossible to clean up, but even to do as well as you could, it would cost that amount of money. The Japanese don't want to admit that Fukushima is a big, expensive, horrible mess, because then they would not be able to restart the other 48 nuclear reactors that they've got, and the United States would not be able to keep running the 104 nuclear reactors of very similar design that they've got, right? And then to finish up, if I may, one story which came on the internet today. It's from the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, who have spoken to someone from TEPCO, a TEPCO insider, who's speaking anonymously. He'll lose his job if they find out who he is. A nuclear industry insider has told the ABC that the situation at the stricken Fukushima reactor is still not under control. At the risk of losing his job if his identity is revealed, a senior TEPCO staffer who's worked at the Fukushima plant for more than 20 years says the situation at the reactor is not under control and no one knows how to fix the problem. The whistleblower says mistakes are made weekly, contaminated water leaks into the Pacific Ocean every day. That's about 400 tonnes a day, straight into the Pacific. The insider says the damaged reactors can never be decontaminated and that people should not be moved back into the no-go zone, the 20-kilometre exclusion area around Fukushima. Thank you. That's a TEPCO insider saying that. I mean, say no more, eh?
And then finally...